merci à toute l'équipe du Jeu de Paume pour la préparation de cette rencontre ce soir. Nous allons donc, sorry, we're gonna, we're speaking English. We are gonna look back on Aida Muluneh's photographic practice as a major figure of photography today, together with her numerous activities as a curator and founder of festivals and fairs and major artistic events on the continent. And it has become a tradition in this 7 à 9 program at the Jeu de Paume. I would let Tess Malavergne introduce Aida Muluneh.
First of all, welcome, Aida Muluneh. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to have this discussion alongside art critic Annelle Pijat, editor of the art newspaper France and journalist at Paris Match. Aida Muluneh, you're a contemporary photographer and artist, but also an educator and cultural entrepreneur. You have a cinematographic vision of the world. You first explored documentary photography, which evolved in a defined and conceptual personal style like no other. Through your photography, you explore your East African identity and womanhood with a colorful and symbolic visual language, and also through a contemporary and futuristic lens. Your work has been exhibited and collected all around the world in prestigious institutions like the MoMA, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art, the Hood Museum, the RISD Museum of Art, and the Museum of Biblical Art in the United States. You've also received numerous international prizes and awards. You're also recognized as a cultural changemaker in Africa, since you have other activities in collaboration with both local and international institutions in Ethiopia, Côte d'Ivoire, and beyond. In 2010, you founded the Addis Photo Fest in Addis Ababa, which is the first international photography festival in East Africa. In 2022, you created the Africa Photo Fair in Abidjan, where you are now based. It is both an exhibition and a virtual publication that brings emerging and established artists to the global photography community. You also established the Africa Print House, a creative space offering end-to-end solutions for photographers in Africa by offering fine art photography printing through your studio in Abidjan. You also work as a curator. In 2019, you were the first Black woman to co-curate the Nobel Peace Prize exhibition, and the following year, you were a commissioned artist for the prize. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And now my turn to present you, Tess. You are 22 years old. You're originally from Paris. You graduated, you got a BA from the School of Fine Arts, l'École des Beaux-Arts de Lyon, a few days ago.
Yeah.
And you're now entering the Masters, also in l'École des Beaux-Arts de Lyon. You're working across figurative painting, analog photography, and editorial practice. As the images behind us show, you explore our contemporary relationship with media and digital images, with a particular interest in how images shape identity, behavior, and self-representation. The recurring themes that you deal with are the body, youth, glamour, fiction, and reality. You use, as I was saying, analog photography to document your close circle of friends and social environments. You're interested in the way young people perform in front of a camera. You use in your images strong flashes to create a direct yet distant relationship with your subjects, and that also appears in your paintings. And as I was saying, your paintings are often inspired by photographs of screens, blurred images, images from films, from the internet, and from other media. And you combine those painting and photographs and slideshow projections in big installations. What you do is mostly to look forward for ambiguous spaces where familiar images become unstable and elusive.
Thank you.
And now we're gonna begin our conversation with you.
Yeah, so, so Aida, throughout your life, you have lived in Europe, Yemen, Canada, and the US, but you were born in Ethiopia, where you returned in 2007. That seems like a major heritage in your practice. Could you tell us what you kept from these roots, like in your actual work?
From traveling in different places?
That, and also being born and having like these roots in Ethiopia, and how maybe like growing up somewhere and then moving around, like how it made everything evolve together.
Well, I left Ethiopia when I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
So I spent most of my life traveling. A lot of people think, my family are diplomats or what have you, but it was just my mother who wanted to find like a better place to live. And obviously education was important to her, and because of that, it was always trying to find a country that we can move to. So at the age of 13, I immigrated to Canada. So my education is, I finished high school in Canada and university in the US. And over the years, because of having all these different cultures growing up, the one constant thing was my Ethiopian identity, because as Ethiopians, regardless of where we live, the most important thing is to remain connected with our country. So my mother was very insistent that I don't forget home. And so in our home, for example, I wasn't allowed to speak English. I had to speak my native language. And that became such an important asset when I decided to go back to Ethiopia, because language is it's not just communication, but also it helped me understand the culture. So when I moved back in 2007, it was almost like relearning my culture all over again, growing up as an immigrant outside and then coming back to a place where I'm supposed to belong in, and then realizing when I came back to Ethiopia, I was also a stranger within my own country. So most of my life has been being a stranger everywhere, and then finding a way to define, what is home to me. And that's basically, one of the big influences, in promoting not only my Ethiopian identity, but also the history, and more importantly as well, is to create like a visual language that had a universal element to it. So when you look at my work, there's still the African identity within it, which is my identity, but also there's a universal aspect of it. And what I'm asking about is more about our universality as opposed to our nationalistic agenda or identity.
What kind of images did you grow up looking at? Was art important as a child and adolescent? Did you look at magazines or museums, or would you have like a first memory of art?
I mean, I remember the first photo that I took was of my mother in Cyprus. So, and we still have that photo. That was, at some point, I disappeared from the family album because I was the one taking the photos. So, but my mother she was big on music, like music was her thing. So a lot of my musical taste actually comes from her. But she's always had like this interest in art, and she really appreciated it. But when I was, I remember in school in Canada, the famine of the 80s, of Ethiopia, that triggered something in me, because the stories that my mother would tell me about home and sort of our culture and all these other things, and then the things that I would see in the media of, the starvation, all these problems in our country. At some point, I realized that, when we look at media and communication, it really makes a big difference of like who is telling the story. So, so at that time, it was very difficult in school, for example, to say I'm from Ethiopia, because automatically, especially when you say from Africa, I remember some of the questions was, do you have an elephant in your home? It's just some really crazy things. And you're like, we live in cities and we have, there's complexities in Africa. But my entry into photography was really based on these images of the 80s, because we went from a nation where we had Emperor Haile Selassie, a black king, on the cover of Time magazine, in the 30s, and then completely the image of the country changed, just from photography. So to me, photography it's not only a personal choice, but also it's been a bigger agenda of this whole point of reimagining Africa through a different lens.
Yeah, you said the first picture you took was of your mother. Did you always have that artistic thing in you? Like, did you always know you would be an artist? And did you have a clear vision of your future growing up?
I wanted to be a vet. This was my...
Oh.
So in the beginning of my childhood, I wanted to be a vet because I loved animals. And then, the thing with my mother was that she always brought books, So I was an avid reader because I was always curious. And earlier on, that was just, my mission was I'm going to be a veterinarian. This was the main thing. And then when I entered Harvard University, I actually started in the School of Business, and my plan was to be a lawyer, and that is not what I ended up doing.
At university, at Howard University in Washington, D.C., you trained in communication with a major in film. To what extent did the practice of film influence your look and your practice of photography? Did it?
Yeah. No, I had really great professors at Howard. I had Haile Garima, who is really a legend for us. And in that department, what was really interesting was that we were looking at cinema from all over the world, and more importantly, looking at cinema from the global south. And the one thing that we were taught was that almost the importance and the urgency of why telling our own story, why this is relevant. But it wasn't until many years later that I realized, because when I'm making my work, I'm building a set. So the background is painted, we build a canvas that's 2 meters by 3. The floor is painted, everything is constructed, but before all of that, I start with a sketch. So in my sketch, I'm effectively making a storyboard of the collection that I'm gonna make. And I know all these habits come from my film education because I'm running a team in a production to make this one vision come to life. And that has a lot to do with my cinematic background.
But you also worked at the Washington Post as a photojournalist, and you often say it was a grounding experience. What did you learn from that? To what extent?
The Washington Post was really my boot camp. So because it's a very competitive place, we were a group of young photographers that entered into the system, and that's when I really understood that, for example, 5 photographers can show up at the same event and come back with completely different viewpoints. And this is where the whole point of teaching photography in Africa and telling our own stories sort of started, because I understood that international media often brings people in from outside to come and document our reality. And even many years later, I did a project with Ethiopian students and German students looking at how much our cultural background impacts what we choose to document, the psychological aspect of it. And so through that post experience, it was very tough. I had very tough editors. But the one thing that I learned then was, and this one thing that I always teach, is that if you want to be a photographer or an artist, you have to accept rejection, because rejection is really inside the business. So if you crumble through rejection, then it's very difficult to move ahead. But Post really taught me some key elements, not only technical things, but really how to construct and how to tell a story through a collection of images. And to this day, I don't teach fine art photography, I teach photojournalism, because I think for any photographer, that is the base, the beginning, the foundation for storytelling. And those are the skills that you're able to take, whether you do fashion, fine art, anything. Those skills are useful almost in any field of photography.
At some point, though, your work evolved towards stage photography and the world of fine arts. And among the major encounters in that field was Simon Jamy. I was wondering how he discovered your work and what your first conversations consist in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the way, I didn't know Simon Jamy, I didn't know Bamako Biennale. So I was in New York one day, and I don't know why I decided to search for photographers in Africa, and the Bamako Biennale showed up. And then I looked at the list, and there was nobody from Ethiopia. So I just decided to send an email saying, why isn't there any Ethiopian photographers in this African festival? And there was a guy on the other end, I remember his name was Serge, I forgot his last name, but he was responding to my emails, and I hadn't submitted any work, and I said to him, well, I'm a photographer, I have this body of work from Ethiopia, and at that time it was like black and white images. So he says, go ahead and send it, and he actually presented it to Simone, even though the deadline had passed. And through that beginnings, when I arrived in Bamako, it was really like a moment of an epiphany, because I was living in the US as an African, trying to have a conversation about Africa, and there was a big, there were challenges within that. So when I arrived in Bamako, it was like finally I meet people who understand what I'm trying to do as well, because they're doing the same thing, and the conversation of representation as well, and self-expression as it relates to what it means to be an African and what have you. So that beginning with Simone was really like the pinnacle point, and at that time, like in Bamako, I was happy to be there. So when I won, I think it was the EU prize that I had received, for me, I had already won by just being there and meeting this network of other photographers across the continent. And throughout the years, it was really Simone who, when the project came for the Divine Comedies, where he had commissioned different photographers, but it was a secret for like 5 years, so nobody knew who was inside of it, or I didn't know anyway. And at that time, because most people knew me for my black and white, I said, okay, I can't do this black and white, let me do something else. And it was really through his provocation that sort of this work came to life through the 99 series, and that was sort of the beginning of me finally finding a visual language that I could express what I wanted to say, not be limited, and just effectively create my own universe of stories and things that I've experienced over the years. And so for that, I'm always grateful for Simone's role in that. Like, this is from the 99 series. So when I did this, it was a 7-piece series. My section within the Divine Comedies was Inferno. And what I wanted to imagine was that, in this day and age, people think you have to die to go to heaven or hell. But my main thing was like all of that exists here on the ground as well. So when I sent the 7 pieces, I wasn't really confident, and I figured Simone would probably shoot it down or something. But he didn't say anything, so I was like, okay, so he doesn't think it's weird, this painted bodies and all of that. So that became sort of the beginning, and it really, when you find something that works, this is for me, finally finding the path to be able to tell the things that I wanted to tell.
And do you have artist mentors, whether in photography or contemporary art, that have been following you through your journey in that field?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important, I think, to have mentors. And for me, the first mentor I had was a photographer, African-American photographer named Chester Higgins Jr. And Chester was doing an exhibition at the Smithsonian at that time. I came across his book while I was a student at Howard University. And I think the title of the book was Feeling the Spirit, and it was all these black and white images. And I thought, wow, like black and white has, so much power. And so when he had the exhibition at the Smithsonian, I'm a professional harasser, so I just went up to him and I said, "Sir," and at that time we were still on AOL and dial-up, and you're still calling, paying for your long distance. So I was in DC, so I decided, once he gave me the number, he knew that there was no letting go. So I'd basically start calling him, and then I would go to New York. And I didn't have money, so I would take a bus for like a day trip. So I would just go there in the morning and then come back at night just to show him, my work. And we stayed in touch like throughout all these years. And I always talk about him because he didn't know who I was. I was really a nobody, but he took a chance, and then we just kept staying in touch, and even had showcased his work in the first edition of the Addis Photo Fest. And then the second mentor for me that was really important was Dudley Brooks, because he was the one that got me into the Post. And Dudley was, at that time, he was a World Press Award winner, and the work that he did was, the guy can show up in a white square box room and come up with an amazing photo, and we could never figure out, like, how can we be like him? So, but he was really part of not only my career, but, he came to Addis Ababa for the AFF, about 3 editions. So, there's several mentors, but it's been very important for my development in that. And I think that's also what has inspired me to mentor other photographers, because, so much was given to me, and then it was important to also give back.
And your images often have this surreal tone that echoes or relates Afrofuturism. It's a field of creation that you often refer to. Can that be considered as your theory grounds, or yeah? Yeah.
No, when you talk about like Afrofuturism, I realize a lot of people don't know what Afrofuturism is. And when you look at sort of the trajectory of Afrofuturism, the first base being music, people like Sun Ra, and you look at the clothing, you look at, the staging and all these other things. And I'm a big sci-fi fan. So my favorite author was Octavia Butler, who is also really in Afrofuturism. But over the years, and for example, when you look at the movie Black Panther, that's the super Hollywood version of Afrofuturism. And the whole point of like really delving into that is that I realized, not as people living outside of Africa, but even for us as Africans, we don't really imagine futuristic elements of our countries, or this futurism. I don't know, what is the way forward going to look like? So a lot of my work really started with, I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of time looking at archives, reading. Inspiration is not something that I'm always aware and open to it all the time, because you don't know where that inspiration is going to come from. So when I first started doing this work, I was doing a lot of research looking at photo archives of Ethiopians, turn of the century, early 1900s, late 1800s, and looking at the clothing that they wear, so a lot of these clothing really comes from that. And there was like this regalness and very interesting aesthetics to it. And then when I started digging even deeper, looking at traditional cultures of Africa, because often I find that when we talk about traditional cultures of Africa, people consider it to be like primitive. And to me, there's nothing primitive about it, because it's highly sophisticated, there's a sophistication to it. And when you look at creativity in Africa, it's not an exercise of vanity for us. It's actually, there's a functionality to what is created, and a lot of it has a spiritual relevance to it. And this is why, like, when you look at Picasso, Picasso took so much from Africa, and then you see this sort of translation into sort of the European approach within it. So within that research, my main thing is to take things from the past, bring it into the present, and then have a conversation of the future. So it's sort of creating like this abstraction between timelines, and that also comes from my photojournalistic work. And if you look at any of my black and white images, you don't know the location, you don't know the time, where it is, and what have you. And this is a way to sort of, reprogram the view of the outside world and what Africa is.
And so you said you're a fan of science fiction, and is there like any other field of creations that inspired you, and is like literature a source of inspirations, and what kind of reader are you? Like, I guess you're more into fictional stories and...
No, I
Maybe
read
not?
pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I wish if I could be a singer, but that's never happening. But music I love very much, and just like naturally I'm a curious person. So it's not just about reading and looking, and it's also having conversations. So everywhere that I travel, I like to break away from whatever the construct of whatever I'm in, and to really go inside and to find out how people are living, you know, the stories that they have within themselves. And but more importantly, in my practice, I love poetry. So normally when I create my work, I'm building the collection. The last thing is always the title. And the title often comes from a poem that I like. And I find poetry to be efficient, but so vast. You know, you can have a poem with one sentence, and that will tell you the story of a book. So within that, you know, I read as much as I can, but also to experience as many different things. Because sometimes, you know, I will look at light, and you know, my obsession is light, but that can inspire me to think about a body of work that I have in mind. And then the rest is basically about experiences and things that I witnessed as a photojournalist that I'm bringing into the fine art.
Could you say a few titles of your series?
Like within my collection,
Yeah.
The World is Nine, which is my favorite. And as you know, the 9/9 series, and then Water Life, and then I had a collection on the distance gaze. So I've been working like a machine, so I have a lot of work. But
You spoke about music, and we came in listening. We came in this room. We all came in this room listening to a music that you chose. Could you tell us about it?
So the song is "The Homeless Wanderer" by Mhoe Sagamari. What is it? Say it again. Sagamariam. That song has been with me for like a long time, and the story of Mhoe was that she was trained in classical music. This during Emperor Haile Selassie's time, and then she decided to become a nun, and so she moved to Jerusalem. And she continued playing her piano. And in some articles, you find the comparison of her as sort of a version of Duke Ellington, for example. But I worked on a project called Timsalet, looking at prominent Ethiopian women of history. So I had a chance to go to Jerusalem and to do a portrait of her. And I've always found her story so fascinating that, you know, she decided to leave the world and to dedicate herself to the religion, but she still maintained playing piano. And if you listen to it, it has sort of a melancholy sort of vibe to it, but it's a song that I really love, and also who she was as a woman I thought was very fascinating.
When do you listen to music? Do you work in music? Do you walk with music? What's your relationship to music, and what kind of other musics do you listen to?
When we're shooting on the set, there's always music around. Most recently, I started a new body of work, mixed media work, utilizing hand painting and silkscreen printing within it. I was working in December on that, and then I realized when I'm making things made by hand, I don't want to listen to music. I would rather watch, I'm not watching a movie, but the movie in the background became sort of my soundtrack within it. I have, I think, quite a diverse taste in music. I just don't like heavy metal and some country music. But outside of that, I will listen to every kind of music.
There is something very attractive in your photographs. We could say that they are not afraid of beauty. What does beauty mean to you, and how do you use it in your work?
Mm. I mean, it's. I was thinking about this question from earlier, and to me, it's. I think the definition of beauty, it's something that, regardless of where you come from, you should you should see it and recognize it. But more importantly, I don't know, there was I think a month ago, I was sitting somewhere and I heard a bird that I've never heard of, but it wasn't a bird like the chirping, it was like a bird singing. And I thought that was so beautiful, to hear that. And a lot of the things that I find amazing are obviously linked to nature and artistically, obvious, when we look at artwork that moves us, there are all these elements. But I think in the day-to-day, we don't spend enough time looking at beauty, and I don't mean from the vanity aspect, but what do we consider to be beautiful? So for me, it's there are many things that I consider beautiful that are not necessarily in the visual arts. It could be something that I see or something connected to nature. For example, I think the most amazing animals are birds, because you can find this. I mean, the color combination of birds by nature. It's so inspirational, and it kind of works in sync in the most amazing way, and that's nature in itself. So I find beauty in the day-to-day. There are many things, but it's difficult for me to tell you, I find this, it's just, there's so many things in life that I think we have to make an effort to look at what that beauty is that is not linked to, I guess, superficiality. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? You understand?
Yeah. And also, like what you said about the colors of the birds, I can totally see that, even if that picture that is right there, and how you can find beauty in everything and reuse it in your art, and that was very clear.
Yeah. But I think we live in a time where we have so many distractions that the beauty is fed to us, mm-hmm. as opposed to us finding the beauty in the day-to-day, Yeah. So, yeah.
Would you see a kind of musicality in your images?
In what way?
I don't know, in the rhythm, in the contrasts, in the stridence, if not in the contrasts of colors and almost of sounds, if it makes sense.
Yeah, like I said, I wish I was a musician, but I don't know. I don't think of it, and I understand what you're saying, but no,
it's not something.
It's just the obsession I have with these colors. This is basically what it is.
We would like now to go more in details in your practice in the studio regarding what's happening in the studio, and but to begin with, maybe could you tell us about the project you're working on at the moment, so that maybe we have something to focus on.
Yeah.
A project to focus on.
No, currently I have a project with National Geographic Society as an explorer. I don't know if the slide is on here for the water life, or maybe they can. So I've been working on the topic of water for quite some time as a photojournalist. I traveled a lot inside Ethiopia. And the one reoccurring thing for me was women, you can stop here. So one of the most reoccurring thing for me was, because I don't fly, I'm going by car everywhere. So I would always see these long lines of women carrying these yellow jerry cans to get water. And the thing that I found even more obscure was that this was the job of the women, to carry these heavy loads of water to go into the home. So this project actually came through an organization named WaterAid. It was supported by the H&M Foundation. And this became my beginnings as it relates to utilizing my creativity in order to address and to advocate for something very specific. So for National Geographic, I wanted to continue with water, but the one thing I said to them is, because I've already done this kind of project, I wanted to do something else. And what I proposed was that I want to come back into my film world and to come back into cinema and to be able to have this conversation not only about water security, but as it relates to innovations within water. So for example, there's a thing called fog harvesting. I'm sure nobody knows what fog harvesting is. Anybody know? Exactly. So this is my point. So basically fog harvesting is the way that you, first of all, the largest installation of fog harvesting in the world is in Morocco. And it's basically these nets that they have set up in which you're able to retrieve water from the air. So if you have humidity and you have water in the air, you're able to trap that water, and then it goes into a receiving basin. You'd be surprised how much water you can get from the air. And in fact, the advancement of fog harvesting from these nets, if anybody knows, last year's Nobel Peace Prize winner was on vapor harvesting. So now they've invented a machine where you can get water. It could be in the desert, and you can get liters of water through that. So one of my agendas was that I no longer wanted to make work and advocacy where, okay, I've made this work, what does it benefit my people? You know what I mean? It's okay, you can talk about, promotion and so forth. So what I proposed to National Geographic is I said to them that what I'm looking for is, to be able to tell this story about this type of innovation around water, but also to have this discussion of how the global north and the south, where you have overconsumption in the global north and you have lack of access in the global south, but to be able to build a project as artists where I would also be making an installation of fog harvesting in Ethiopia. And this way, it's not just a matter of creating a body of work, but also really having some kind of an impact to the community on the ground. And that has become really an important project for me, because it's a way for me as well to bring in my documentary, my photojournalistic side of me with my fine art, but put these together into like a movie basically, but while we're addressing something that has a tangible solution on the ground. And this has been really the path for me, because I think like as artists in Africa, we have so many responsibilities, and there's a lot of urgency as well within it. But within that, what it comes down to is that how can we offer actual solutions to the people that need it, while at the same time, maintaining our creativity. And this is always the major challenge. So this project is really looking at that, of how are we going to implant something inside the community. And I often say, like, I'm not here to save Ethiopia or save Africa. I'm just here to make my contribution into making an impact and making a change within my own country.
Yeah, you mentioned the merging of like photojournalistic pictures and fine art photographs and creating a sort of movie, and that's kind of like the talk we had earlier, like how this studying films has a big place in how you start a project and how you construct, how do ideas come to you, and how do you like construct them, because like, yeah.
I mean, the ideas are, I don't have a shortage of ideas, I just have a shortage of time and money. This is always the big challenge. But it depends, like if I'm being commissioned, so for example, for the Water Life collection, again, I go back to the research. So what I often ask from, so I've done work with WaterAid, I've done work with the Nobel Peace Prize Center, and then I've done work with an organization called the End Fund, looking at disease in Africa. So often for these kind of organizations, I request for the transcriptions of interviews of community people facing what have you, you know. And because often when we look at the challenges of Africa, everything becomes numerical and everything is very sterile, but there's no human element to actually understand what do people experience. So when I did the work for the End Fund, the interviews that I read really offered me insight on the psychological aspect of disease, you know. So, and within that psychological aspect, for example, when you look at diseases like leprosy, once the community has identified that person having leprosy, and once they've been healed, they can never come back into the community, so they're still shunned, and then they have to live away from the community. And there's a human element to that, which is loneliness, you know, abandonment, rejection, all these other things. So this is the stuff that I try to incorporate into the work by reading these interviews, and then the rest is just based on, you know, the stories and the experiences that I've had that I want to share. And I was telling you earlier, you know, what it comes down to is that everything that you see in these images, these are stories that either I've experienced or I've seen, or so I'm not sitting here representing like, you know, a reality of somebody else. It's something that I feel that I've gone through it, and this is what I want to share. And the same thing, you know, a lot of people ask me about, first of all, the most recurring question is, people ask me if it's me in these photos, and to me, I'm not a narcissist to photograph myself, but anyway, there's photographers that do that. But to me, there's that question, and then the other is often I'm asked, you know, how do I piece together, you know, all the images, and a mix of it is, for example, this image is in Côte d'Ivoire, in Banco Forest. So this is actually, there's only 2 forests in the world that are inside a city. One is in Rio de Janeiro, and the other one is in Côte d'Ivoire, and it's a huge forest in there. So this is really an installation. There's an artist named James Kokobi who did a green art festival inside the forest, and this was an artist who had made this sort of cocoon. And I found it like many years later. It's been 2 years since the festival happened, so we had to go back in and fix it. But there's an element of reality, and then there's an element of fiction in all my work. So obviously, in this image, what you see of the trees is real, you know, but what I'm known for is I use Photoshop, and I always say my use of Photoshop is like putting like salt in the stew, you know. It's not the stew, but it's just sort of the sprinkles within it. So I often duplicate the models to sort of express the things that I want to do. So all these things are like, you'll find it in my sketches. Then from the sketch, we're shooting, and often the whole point of sketching everything out is so that there's nothing I hate like showing up and trying to figure out what to shoot, you know. So all of that has been done, and the point is always to find a better idea. So everything's sketched out, mapped out. Sometimes we go through that whole exercise, we build the set, and I look at the shot, and it's not good. So then I have to figure out a way to change and reassemble everything. Or sometimes it's been sketched, shot, and then when we go into the editing process, the image becomes completely something different, you know. So that has always been sort of the process within it, and technically, my work is mathematics, you know, my settings are always the same, my distance is the same, you know. So all these things I have systemized, and then all I'm focusing on is the content.
How do you decide for the compositions? Because most of your images, in most of your images, the characters have this very hieratic position that seems quite close to almost Roman frescoes, or how do those almost geometrical forms come up?
I think that comes from my black and white work, because in black and white, for me, the obsession is like lines, symmetry, shadows, dark, light, you know. So there's a specific order when I look at when I'm shooting black and white, and those are the things that I'm attracted towards. Whereas in the fine arts, to me, it's, for example, I want the female figure not in the sexual way, but in a strength way. And so, when you see my work exhibited, the eyes follow you, and everything is in the eyes for me. So I'm removing a lot of elements. So, for example, the color of the face, and even, for example, on this image, the region that I come from, women tattoo their necks. Even my grandmother had a tattoo. So the sign of beauty for us is the length of the woman's neck. So in our region, the women will tattoo the necks to make their necks look more elongated. So I'll put these kind of elements in that Ethiopians know what I'm, like this image, Ethiopians will know what is inside this image, but for you, you look at the aesthetics of it. But for me, it's, there's also a factor of, I think, some of the work for some people might be slightly disturbing, but they just don't know why. There's always this question of what is exactly in here. So in that process, my whole approach is to be organized, but also to allow for the magic moment as well to enter into, because there's certain things that, and I think that's the key thing from photojournalism is that normally, when we go on assignment, we already know, we need this shot and that shot and so forth, but what we're really looking for is sort of that magic moment that we don't expect, that we cannot repeat. So in this setting, when you look at my reel or my contact sheets, there's always that one image that is the right moment, and that goes back to the eyes and the gaze and how she looks back at the camera, and all those points are quite important. But then when you look at inside the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, eyes play a major part, and you'll see ancient wall paintings with the eyes being quite prominent. Some of the churches like 12th century, and still the eyes is very strong everywhere. So there are these things inside the work. So I'm just really grabbing from different things, but at the end, does this express what I want to say? This is the goal.
Yeah, your models are mostly women. How do you choose them? How do you direct them? And would you say there's a sort of woman gaze? And how could you define that?
In the beginning, I think I've only shot 2 photos with one guy. But I realized I'm telling my story, and obviously I'm a woman, so I'm going to use a female model within it. But over the years, I realized that if you put all the models that I have in one room, their personalities are quite the same. And I realized I look for women models who have the strength, because to work in this sort of setting and the way that I work, it's quite intense. And so most of for example, this one is an Ivorian model. I started with her when I did the Nobel collection, and there was another model with her, and both come from the fashion, the fashion world in Abidjan. And one thing that I said to them was that I'm not looking for so the other model was becoming, and I said, no, this is not what I'm looking for. It's got to be very straight, and it's the gaze, I'm looking for the eyes. So in the end, I kept her and I continued working with her. So all my models at some point, because at the end of the day, it's not, there's a saying that the photographer doesn't take the photo, it's the sitter that gives the photo. So I need to make sure that the model and I are on the same wavelength, that we have an understanding. So if you come to my set, I'm not giving a lot of directions, because everything's already organized, and then the models know exactly what I'm looking for, and it's just minor adjustments that I do with them. And we have long hours. It's quite intense, but it's so important, the relationship that I have with the model, because in essence I feel like she is the extension of me as well, and that she's basically in a sense performing my feelings and my stories and my experiences, and that becomes a very a close relationship that over the years, even when I'm doing model scouting and, looking for models. I'm also looking for specific features, but more importantly, outside of the features is the personality. And, all the models that I've had, I mean, they're very strong women, very confident, and at the same time, they understand that even though this is like very strange for them, that they're really part of a process that is quite unique and something that, makes me very excited when I find the model that really gets it, because then I can keep working with them. And
you spoke about, you said you were interested in fashion photography. How do you elaborate, how do you create the costumes? Do you sometimes, is it always you? Do you sometimes work with fashion designers? How does that happen?
I wish. No, because I was saying earlier that I wanted to be a fashion photographer, but I sucked in fashion photography, and then for some reason fashion found me in the end. All my clothing is just me going to the market, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So I like going to the market in Africa, obviously. But I go to the market, there's a specific fabric that I'm looking for. It has to be a specific tone. It has to hang a specific way, And then most of the guys that make clothes in Ethiopia often are men. So for them, they're like, what is this? Like, she wants us to sew. And I told them, like, I'm not looking for functionality. I'm just looking for draping. So I will work with just the local guys on the streets. So for example, we have what we call kabba. It's how do you say in English? It's a cape. So normally in our history, that cape is worn by the elite or the royal family. And if you look at archive photos of Ethiopia, you'll see men and women wearing these long capes. And then eventually that got phased out, and then from the cape, basically now it's only the priests that wear the cape. So when I go to get the capes made in all these strange colors, the guys sewing it are like, which priest is wearing this, And I'm like, it's not for a priest, it's for a photo shoot. So I will sort of like reconstruct certain elements of it. But all of it is just me coming up with the design and just going to the local guy and saying, put this together for me. But the inspiration really comes from these archives. And then when you look at for example, the headscarf, how the headscarf is put on, there's specific ethnic groups in Ethiopia that have headscarves that way. Then, there's certain colors. So all of these, there's coding in all the work that I do.
And how about the sets? And you said some of them were real and came from reality. And do you also design other indoor sets? And
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of so for the background, I'll work with different artists. So I will sketch out the design that I want. So everything that you see for the majority, it's a real thing. So when we're working inside the studio, the set is made, and then we go into Photoshop and we clean up things, So sometimes, if you ever see vertical lines in my work, that's actually a cloth that's been stretched out. But if you go into the specific detail, you realize it's not a straight line. And me, I love this Japanese concept of perfecting the imperfection, So I leave elements in there. So for example, when you look at the painting on the bodies, you can see the brush strokes on it because, there's different forms you can spray it on. But I thought that was just too clean. I wanted some imperfection within it. But if you can go back to the previous slide with the water.
Est-ce qu'on peut retourner en arrière?
With the boat.
Les images.
Are they on? So for example, this is where the Water Life project. So I did a music video here for Fatuma Diawara. I did the Water Life project, and then I went back when Naunas was doing a video on me in order to shoot this here. So this is in the eastern part of Ethiopia, in a region called Afar. Nighttime is 40, just to give you an idea, the heat. So this landscape, because it has 3 variations of the landscape, I can do different things in this one location. So often when I do actually, shooting in the environment, I have to look at the color how the color reacts, you know. So I can tell you based on landscape in Ethiopia, which color is gonna work and not work as it relates to the clothing. So all these things I have to come up with. These boats are just, you know, we just constructed one-dimensional boats, you know, and then it's actually propped in the back, you know. So if you can go to the next, so every element is something that has been captured in reality. Can you go to the next? So for example, the floor is painted, the background is painted, I mean, everything is painted. That's the thing that we call chera, which is most African countries, it's like a fly swatter. So that actually belongs to my grandmother that I wanted to put in there. Then my childhood memory of my grandmother is, I'm sure none of you have experienced this, but you take, what do you call it, cotton in its purest form, and my grandmother used to, how do you say it in English? You can make a thread.
Yeah, filet.
Huh?
I know.
Yeah. I mean, it's an art, and I wish I knew how to do that. So that was really my memory of my grandmother. But if you look closely at this image, it's actually a barbed wire that she's holding on to. So there's small things that are inside each work that I place. So at first, when people look at it, they just, you know, they're bombarded by the color, but there's a lot of layers inside of it.
Could you tell us a bit more about the choice of the primary colors that you do, and also of this technique of the practice of the body paint that's present very much in your images?
So most people don't know this, but the first body painting I did, it was when I was a student at Howard. And there is one image inside the permanent collection at the Smithsonian. That was their first acquisition. There's a piece called The Spirit of Sisterhood. And at Howard University, we had a homecoming event, which is like a big event in DC. So at that time, the fashion show director was looking for photographers to make a communication work for the fashion show. So I'm in an American school and in an African American school as an African, and my main thing was like, again, you know, this whole concept of not belonging. So I said, okay, let me make a work that represents my African identity into this contemporary. And it was actually a black and white photo that I took with the dotted faces, and the models were painted black, dotted faces, and a black veil on top of them. And then I submitted it for the fashion show director for consideration. He thought it was the weirdest thing he's ever seen. Obviously, it didn't get selected because he was like, what the hell is this dotted face, and how does it represent a fashion show? But it wasn't until I think 2003 or something like that that it got exhibited at the Smithsonian. So that was really the beginning of my face painting. And then I left that fully, went into my photojournalism, went into documentary filmmaking. But it was really through Simone's whole thing that I said, okay, let me come back to this face painting. Maybe there's something inside of it. Then when I started doing the research, we have an ethnic group in the southern part of Ethiopia, in the Omo Valley, where they paint their faces, you know, different things, you know, dots, all of these other things. And that really became, okay, I need to research more about these face paintings. So when I looked at face painting in South America, face painting in Africa, there was a lot of similarities without any historical connection. So I thought this was fascinating, that as people using your body as a canvas to tell something very specific. So that was the story of the face painting. And then for the primary colors is, I never felt comfortable in color in photojournalism. So I never, unless color was like really confronted me, I never really, color wasn't, black and white was always my thing. So I decided, okay, let me just start with the primary colors. You know, so the first colors that I chose was obviously the red, white, and black. And then slowly I started adding the blue. So this was my first sort of attempt with color. And then progressively I got comfortable with the red. I went into the blues, into the yellow. And it was just many years later, looking at my archives, when you were asking me, do I look at my work from the past? it's when I went back to look at my archives and I realized actually these attraction to these primary colors exist in my photojournalistic work, and that is what I've carried over into the fine art.
And what kind of camera do you use? Like, you don't want to say?
No. It's just such a random question.
Yeah, I know, but I can go to the next question because it's...
No, I'm a Canon ambassador,
links.
so I'll say Canon and all of that. So,
you know. No, but because like, what are your thoughts on like new technologies such as AI and their impact on the art world, in particularly in the field of photography?
I mean, I've been asked this a lot, and the way that I explained it was that photography was the revolution to painting. You know, when photography first came, all the painters were like, this is not real, this is not art. Even to this day, folks say that. But, so photography was the revolution to that. And I think AI is the revolution to photography. But when you look at the valuation, painting is still, you know, there's a respect. It's not like painting disappeared because photography entered. So photography is not going to disappear because AI has arrived, you know. And I think at this stage, we're becoming like AI fatigued. I don't know for anybody else, but me, you know, like I want to see AI doing what photography cannot do. And that's the creative part of it that I'm interested in. But it's just another thing to contend to. But more importantly, it's just another tool. This is what it comes down to. And what we choose to do with it, that's going to be the real thing. But I know photographers still printing in the darkroom, you know, still using film. You know, it's not like it's going to phase out or anything like that. But it's a matter of the ethics of it is what needs to be discussed further. Because reality, like we're in this space, we're not going to be AIing everybody in here, you know. So we still need to document reality as well, because reality is part of the human experience.
We spoke a lot about images and figuration. Are you interested in abstraction?
What do you mean? Like,
I thought your images have this almost abstract dimension in them, and I was wondering if it was something you were looking for, and in your work, but also in other people's work, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's more surrealism to me. We were upstairs, and I saw a portrait of Marguerite, and I'm a super fan of him, because he was doing that at that time while wearing his suit and ties. I thought this was fascinating. But to me, no, it's just about like using creativity in order to be able to transmit something. You know, this is what I'm looking at. Because sometimes, like when I come to Europe, there will be like an exhibition, and the abstraction part of it, you're like, what the hell is this? Like, you don't understand any of it. I mean, for me. So sometimes it can go too far. And I was telling her earlier, there's some people that say, oh, you know, we don't understand your work. And my main thing is, it's not for you to understand it, but it's really to remember it. And that, I think, is the goal of every artist, is to be remembered, that once you see my work, if you see it again, you will like remember, oh, that must be her work.
You said how important collaboration is in the studio. You seem to be often surrounded by persons when you work. How far can they go in the discussion on an artistic?
Oh no, I'm very open to that. So I mean, it's a team effort because the energy needs to be right. So if we don't have the right energy in the team, usually I'll get rid of somebody to fix the energy, or you know, we're gonna work it out on the set. And there's been times where, because I don't like, the team does not know how I'm gonna shoot things. They just know that we're building the pieces to put everything together. And sometimes when they do finally see that, like what exactly I'm gonna shoot, I mean, you know, I can hear them sort of gasping in the back. You know, there's been moments like that. But there's elements where I'm quite open with suggestions, ideas. I mean, it's not, there's no such thing as a bad idea in my opinion, but also for the morale of the team, you know, I want everybody to have ownership in this. You know, it's not just me and the model, you know, everybody has their hands in this.
Earlier you said something about transmission. What are the definition and the mission of photography for you?
I mean, to me, it has like three parts. One, it's documentation, and especially when we talk about the archives of Africa, you know, we barely have any archives in the continent. So the role of photography is documentation, the witness of the here and now for the future. The second, for me, is like a tool for education, and I mention this because. I've witnessed projects where the most effective way for social advocacy in like rural communities is through the image. You know, I remember there was a woman who made a visual representation for a women cooperative who couldn't read and write, but visually representing, you know, how to save money, you know, how to do these things and that thing. And the third for me is like it's self-expression. I mean, photography is an art as well. And that's why like photography sits in a very unique position that we can be one or all, you know, we're not limited. And when you look at the spectrum of this craft, you know, there's so many different things that you can do with photography. But the ultimate thing is that what are we educating? So whether you're doing commercial photography, whether you're doing fine art, what is it that you are passing on to the viewer? You know, what is it that you are teaching people?
Yeah, and I think that with teaching, you also showed that it is also an artistic medium and also a viable profession capable also of creating opportunities, and also like in Africa, in the whole continent. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was a comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were speaking before we started here on stage about the position of photography on the African continent, and do you consider? I mean, it's well known that together with your photographic work, you're also very committed in the artistic scene and photographic scene by all these projects you've launched and you're working on still at the moment. What do you consider that photography has a special importance in Africa today compared to other parts of the world, especially among young people? And if so, why would that be?
Yeah, I mean, photography, for example, when I'm curating for the festival, and more recently for Africa Photo Fair, and I was telling you this, like, when Dudley Brooks came to Abidjan and he saw the installation, the one comment that he made was that he hasn't seen that level of diversity in self-expression through photography. And he thought this was really fascinating, that even now, like, I can tell you, for example, what photographers in East Africa, what they gravitate towards, what the West Africans, what the North Africans. So even regionally, the aesthetics is very distinct based on the location of where that photographer comes from. And the other thing is that, you know, for photographers in Africa, it's very difficult for us to do photojournalism because we have a lot of things to contend with as it relates to security, you know, freedom of press. We're still at the infancy of these kind of things. And this is why you see a big entry of fine art photographers, you know, going global, because what we're not able to do by capturing the reality, we can only express it in this, as you say, the abstraction of it. So, and when you look at the history of photography in Africa, is that everything was like studio oriented. And I was telling you earlier that in Ethiopia, if you were doing street photography, even starting from the emperor's time, like, you were considered a spy. Who goes walking around the streets and taking photos, you know? Because our idea of photography was inside the studio, family portraits, you know, vanity portraits, these kind of things. So, so within that, you know, the sort of the progression of photography in the continent through just sheer innovation and persistence. Imagine to get the camera, first of all, forget about getting the money for the camera, getting the camera into the country. That's even another issue within itself. But through all of these sort of challenges, the fact that every year I'm seeing new and new photographers entering and finding this medium and reconstructing it to tell a specific story or a specific part of their life to share with the world. And what has really benefited us, I think, it's not like, some people think, art from Africa, we just discovered it yesterday. No, people have been making art for a long time. It's just from the sheer fact that we have these phones, we have network, now we have the social media, and it's sort of the gatekeeping element has been slightly removed, in which photographers are being photographers are more accessible now than before. Because I remember when I was starting, in order for me to send my portfolio, I needed to do a copy slide of, first I need to make a print, then a copy slide of my work, then to send that slide to the editor just to have the work viewed, and you don't know if you get a response or not. Whereas now with all these technologies and all this internet and what have you, this has opened up for people from outside of the world to see what's happening in the continent. And that's why I encourage, because I've taught in Europe, as I mentioned, that's why I try to, normally when I'm teaching in Europe, my main priority is my curriculum is not based on the usual suspects of photographers. I look for photographers in other parts of the world to show exactly similar concepts, but how the Global South is visualizing their reality.
Yeah, in 2010, you founded Addis Photo Fest, and I guess it required different set of skills than making photographs. What led you to creating such an object? What did you learn from that experience?
So when I arrived end of the year 2007 to Addis Ababa. My plan was to only be there for 3 months, and it became 14 years. So, but when I arrived there, I started teaching. That was the first thing, because Ethiopia is still, unfortunately, still marked, and a lot of parts of Africa are still marked by the cliche images that we've seen rotating, in the media. So when I arrived in Addis Ababa, I started teaching at the Addis Ababa University Fine Arts School, and so my goal was to teach painters first, because I noticed a lot of the painters are taking a photo and using the photo as a reference to do their paintings. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay, let me start by teaching folks that are already in the arts, And then from that, I realized that, okay, it wasn't just about developing photographers, then I need to have all the stakeholders on board, meaning I need to also, in a sense, educate the community of what exactly is photography. And so when I started the festival in 2010, I've never done a festival, never done any event, I was really new at that. But it's just the sheer conviction that, okay, I'm going to build an international festival to show, young artists, young aspiring photographers, and more importantly, to show my community what does photography look like beyond our borders. So, and then the other important factor was to get the government on board as well, because one of the biggest issues that we had was the policy for Ethiopian photographers was foreign photographers have more rights than us. So for me, my main agenda was like, okay, we need to change this policy that they have for us, but the way that we can convince them is to put them inside, to let them know, okay, this is the work that we're showcasing, and to show them because at the end, when you talk about nation branding, it cannot happen without an image. You need the image at the end of the day. So through that, even I gave a presentation, a speech in Parliament to our previous Prime Minister, and the one question that I asked him was that, when you think of Paris, what do you think about? And the first visual reference for everybody is the Eiffel Tower. When you think about New York, what do you think about? You think about the Statue of Liberty, Okay, when you think of Africa, what do you think about? And it's usually the giraffe and, I don't know, the gorilla in the mist, these kind of things, or war, or whatever other cliche. So that requires work to be done on it, and that responsibility comes to us. So for me, having a festival and producing a festival was really to see what is the talent out there. And what we found was that I remember the first edition of the Addis Photo Fest, I think I only exhibited about 5 photographers from Ethiopia. And the 2018, we had like 36 photographers from Ethiopia. So I knew, okay, this has an impact on it. And then what we started seeing was that for me in Africa, the billboards are the big markers for me, where that country is visually, who's documenting it and so forth. So in Addis Ababa, we started seeing that the advertising campaigns, the quality started changing because we were effectively developing the talent to enter into the commercial market. And then one of my biggest arguments with, for example, the UN agencies is, why do we need to bring foreigners into our countries to document our realities? And their main argument was, well, we don't have any talent. And I'm like, no, this is the talent that we have systemized, we've professionalized. And eventually in Ethiopia, it came to a point where basically we had more than enough photographers to document our own realities and to shift sort of how the industry part of it is. And in the experience of Ethiopia, for me, was that I realized that a lot of young people understood, okay, this is actually a viable profession, that it's not just about being a wedding photographer or a studio photographer, that you can actually use photography to do so many different things, And now in this day and age, I think, the biggest thing for commercial photography in Africa is AI, because now all the billboards are AI. And this is, yeah.
After COVID, you created the online platform Africa Photo Fair. How did that come up? How did you come to that new structure?
So for me, it was really to do virtual learning. This was exactly how we started, and this virtual learning, we have embedded it in each edition of the festival. Even now, I've started doing more virtual learning because you have to remember a lot of the opportunities for photographers from Africa to travel abroad is becoming more difficult because of the visa restrictions. Then there's the question, so for example, for me, it's a big struggle to invite people into the continent to teach for me, because a lot of the times, like if I was doing a music concert, there's a lot of support for the performing arts, but there's not enough support for the visual arts in the continent. And this is obviously from my observation. But I realized that, okay, as Africans, we don't need to be going here and there. We just need the information. And what we know of now is that a lot of the photographers in the continent are learning through YouTube videos. And we get those students. So when they come to us, often they're missing specific parts of education that if they had gone to a school and so forth and what have you. So I started launching this virtual programming, started doing mentoring, and then this year the big focus is really to do more virtual learning, because I realized also that not just in Africa but globally, I realized that a lot of photographers are kind of stuck in the same point. Once you learn the technical and understand how to do this and that, then there's a position where to move to the next phase of your career. This is a challenge that a lot of photographers are facing. So within that programming for these virtual classes, it's really to be able to share as much information as possible without the limitation of space or limitations of budget, all these other things, and then to make things more accessible.
It seems that on the continent, many art schools in the past years have been, in the absence of public art schools, lots of existing art schools have been created by artists. Mm-hmm. How do you see that as a reality, and how do you explain it?
Yeah, it's.
I'm thinking of Michael Armitage, for instance, or
yeah.
Other cases.
I think that for a lot of the activities in Africa, which are led by often by artists, it's because of the level of urgency, So for me personally, I'm not gonna wait for the government, Like if I'm able to do it, I'm going to do it. So in that way, I think that and it's not just me. I mean, there's many artists in Africa that are making contributions by educating the next generation. But these things are important for us because in order to move things forward and to shift the market, because at the end you have to remember, we are selling a commodity, however you want to look at it, you know, and the better prepared we are for that international market, the better it is. So for those of us who have that international experience, coming back into our, wherever that we're from, and transmitting these kind of information, it's so relevant because it has an impact on the local market. And also, how we negotiate with the international market is so important. But that information is not something like a gallery will tell you, you know what I'm saying? It's something that artist to artist, these are the conversations that need to happen, you know? So within that, it's, I think that we do the, it's not the, you know, it's not a path for everybody. I don't expect everybody to be like that. But for some of us, this is what we have chosen. And we were talking earlier, I was telling her that I was interviewed many years ago by some media, and the woman asked me, you know, why are you doing a festival, and why don't you just be an artist and continue on that? And I said, actually, this is an extension of my practice. I mean, I find these things to be, like, first of all, if I don't find it inspiring, and I don't move for nothing, you know. So I find these things to be like inspirational, and why not, you know? Because even when I was at the Washington Post, one of the biggest critics for my work from one of my editors was that he used to say, you want to be a fine art photographer, you want to be a photojournalist, you need to decide which one. I'm like, why can't I be both? But for me, the victory is when I went back to the Post with my fine art and it got published, and I'm like, okay, this is to show you I can do both. But anyway, so it's not the path for everybody, but it's a necessity because of our higher educational institutions lacking funding, lacking proper infrastructure, and so forth. And really, the artists of Africa it's through their sheer resilience and sheer curiosity that to manage to go from the local context and to be showcasing internationally. For someone like me, I have a Western education, you know, I'm able to go in and out and so forth. But for those that are in the continent and managing to exhibit internationally, I mean, that path, it's not an easy path. And I have big respect for artists that have made it out.
So do you think that the photography market is in good health at the moment in the continent compared to the international art scene? Or
What do you mean, the market or the scene?
Like the market, also.
So the art market, in my opinion, there's a lot of great artists that don't get the opportunity, right? So one, that. The other thing as well is, I mean, let's just start with the international higher educational institutions, you know. It's just most recently that I think a lot of the higher educational institutions, like the schools that you go to and so forth, that started incorporating work that was not only European or Western artists. You know, they started looking at artists from the global south. So I think that's an important thing to show, because you guys are not in your bubble. You know, there's stuff happening everywhere. So for the higher education institutions, there's this slow movement within it. My only concern is I'm not confident that the higher educational institutions are preparing young artists how to enter into the market, you know. And for example, financial literacy, let's just start with that. Yeah. You know, yeah. That needs to be inside to understand. And a lot of artists don't realize you're running a business at the end of the day, you know, because you need to earn your income, you need to sell your work, you need to do your marketing, all these other things. So there are all these components that are missing inside these educational systems, which eventually trickles into the market, you know. And my view is that sometimes the market is based on networking and less to do about the work, you know, or it's based on tokenism. You know, there's nothing I hate like, I remember during what is it called, during the George Floyd Black Lives Matter. During Black Lives Matter, I got so many messages of different people who had just discovered me. I think they just Googled like black female artist, and I guess my name popped up. And for me, this is like the lazy way of looking at things, you know? So there's an element of exoticism as well within it. And I'm only speaking this as an African who has had this international experience. So the market is shifting, and there's a lot of conversation happening to where exactly is this market and what direction, and globally, not just us in Africa. But at the end, it's like the big question, I think, is like who enters and who doesn't enter, and what validates who's an artist, what validates who sells work or who goes into a museum show, all these other things, you know. And I feel that that conversation is sort of festering and coming up because I know that there's many great artists that don't have the same opportunities. And also there is this strange elitism within the art world, which as artists, I don't know, for me, I think there's an art for everybody. You know, different art forms can suffice for somebody. It might not be for everybody and so forth. But I think for the art market, because we've seen the closing of galleries in the US, you know, even when you look at the valuation of the sales, it hasn't really caught on since COVID. I think the past 2 or 3 years, it's still not where it needs to be. And what I've understood is that the buyers are changing as well. So meaning you have young buyers who are now growing up and looking for the story as opposed to the prestige of buying the Picasso. You know, they're looking for a meaning outside of the work, but they want to know more about who's making the work. So that new generation of buyers is now slowly entering. And I think that's going to be what shifts the market as opposed to sort of this old guard of the art market.
And what about the position of women, not only as artists, but also in this African art world? Because it seems it's a male-dominated world, but at the same time, some of the big names are women, such as BC Silva, Koyoko, you.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of galleries also, which are run by women. What's your opinion on the situation now?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think there is, like for example, in Abidjan, I think it's majority women-led galleries, which I find very interesting.
In Dakar as well?
In Dakar as well. And I think that, but then when you look at the artistic side, which is the ones creating the artwork, it's still very male dominated, you know. But I feel like we still have a long way to go in that regard as artists. Forget about Africa, just globally. And I remember, like I've juried pretty much every competition that there is for photography, and one of the things I ask for is the data. You know, I want to know what the numbers are, and often it's still male dominated, regardless of which field that you're looking at or which form of self-expression. And for a lot of the female artists that I've encountered, those that I have trained and so forth, it's almost like the family obligation sort of becomes the big hindrance. You know, it's very difficult to be a mother. I mean, I'm a mother, but it's difficult to be a mother and to maintain an artistic career. And I feel like that itself is like, there needs to be an education just for that, because we lose out on a lot of female artists that no longer produce, you know, as soon as they have babies, they're not making work anymore, and that's sort of a missed opportunity. But again, it comes back to the infrastructure and to really support. I mean, at the end, for me, I'm like in every jury, I'm not looking for like the African or the woman. I'm looking for the best artist. But when I look at these numbers, we still have a long way to go.
And time is passing, but we haven't spoken about your curatorial activities yet, which are another extension of your practice, probably.
Yeah, in 2020, you were the first Black woman to co-curate the Nobel Peace Prize exhibition. Could you tell us about this show, about this experience?
So, so for the Nobel, when our Prime Minister won the Nobel Peace Prize, it was another photographer that was commissioned, which was, ironic. So, so the photographer contacted me, and so my main goal was to showcase Ethiopia, because for him to come for 10 days, what is he going to say about my country that we haven't already done or finished, So, so my main goal was to take photographers from the Addis Photo Fest, photographers from Ethiopia, and to showcase that body of work. And to me, it was like surprising that the year after, because the year after was the year that the World Food Program received the award. So when they came back to me, this is where I created this body of work. So when they came back to me, it was to look at how food is a tool for war, how through starvation, all these things that happen. So I selected countries that I had a personal history with. So for example, in the collection, this is Ethiopia. I had Yemen from my childhood. I had the genocide of the Armenians, because we have a large Armenian community historically in Ethiopia. So I chose countries that I had a special link to. But in the curation aspect of things, it's something that I really enjoy. And I mean, I love other people's works, and often, especially during the festival when there's submissions or I'm working on these projects, it's really exciting to see, to find work that I haven't seen before, and to be able to share it with the community and to see how the community reacts to the work. So.
And so when do you decide to make room for a show that you curate from, for instance, the Daniele Tamani show in Dakar at IFAN, to a group show like a Reframing Neglect Africa tour at the Modern Art Museum in Addis Ababa? What makes you decide to do something and to not do your own work during that time?
I don't know, it's like a lot of people ask me, how do I have the time to do all these things? The easiest stuff for me is to make my artwork. The most difficult is to change mindsets, to change the market, to educate, these are the most difficult. So I go for the difficult because those are the most important to me. Making my artwork, I wish I was doing my artwork all year round, but again, it just goes back to the urgency of like the importance of like, okay, I need to do something in order it's, I come from a culture where like your legacy is not like how much money you have in your bank account or that. It's about who have you passed on, who have you transmitted to take that to the next person. So when I work on projects, I have a great team. We're well organized, and we just basically map out the things that I want to work on. And for someone like Daniel Tamani, I mean, he was he was a photographer looking at fashion in Africa and also in South America and in Asia. And the way I came through that was his father contacted me, and he had passed, and his father wanted to make an exhibition of his work, but we worked on a book, in fact. So we started with the book. We did the exhibition in Milano, and then he was adamant about showcasing in Dakar because Daniele had a special relationship with Dakar, and that was really his beginning of looking at fashion in Africa. But I work on projects that there's an alignment, and there's like a good energy, but more importantly, that it's something that's interesting as well.
So we're almost coming towards the end of the conversation. We still have 2 questions before we do our ritual questionnaire.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a student, and like, what kind of advice would you give to a young photographer or someone who wants to start in that field?
I mean, first you have to decide you want a short-term career or a long-term career. So that's the first thing. The second is understand that, as I mentioned earlier, you have to organize yourself because now there's even more, I told you that there's even more competition now. So that means is that you have to be always curious. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to accept rejection, but to keep pushing forward. There's some competitions that I jury in, and I see photographers, the same photographers submitting like every year, and I find that commendable because then there's a year that they get in. But what a lot of photographers don't realize is that when they submit to competition, we're all looking at the names, and those names stick with us, you know. And sometimes for me, for example, there are things that I have that I'll find a name from that jury that I will contact them to see if they're interested in working on something specific. And the third thing is, like, never assume that you've arrived. I haven't even arrived, you know. So that means is that we're always evolving as artists. You know, we don't remain stagnant in one thing. You know, we always have to grow. But that means is that you have to be authentically present and always curious.
I think that's the most beautiful conclusion.
Oh.
So we will stop now, okay? And now we will ask you a few questions that you can answer in a word, one word, or more, if you wish.
It's like more lightweight questions, but
So many questions today.
what is your main character trait?
Main character, what?
Trait?
In
Main
me?
aspect
yeah,
of your...
in you.
Huh?
In your personality.
Seriousness.
Okay.
Seriousness. Everybody says I'm too serious, right?
Your biggest luxury.
My biggest luxury, as far as things that I bought, or
In terms of anything, or the song of a bird, or...
I guess the life I'm living.
Sorry.
The life I'm living.
Who are your favorite female characters in fiction?
I'm trying to think. In literature or in cinema?
Anything.
There's so many. Oh my God. Tell me more.
More what?
Like when you say fiction, like I'm trying to.
I don't know. Do you have like even like growing up, like female characters you could like look up to?
I mean, for me, from a very early stage, as it relates to photographers, I mean, obviously, Annie Leibovitz for me was. I wish if I could shoot like her. This was my my main thing. Within cinema, well, actually, within literature, like Toni Morrison is someone that I think, you know, you were talking about music and so forth, and she has a book called Jazz, you know, so when you said that, that's what came to my mind earlier on. But yeah. Should I continue?
Who would be the guests of an ideal dinner? They can be alive or not.
You guys asked me this earlier, and I really had to think about it.
No, that's the principle to ask you now.
So, in an ideal dinner, so for me, obviously, the authors need to be there, as I mentioned earlier. Octavia Butler, I find very fascinating. Nina Simone, I love. Toni Morrison, obviously. And from the photographers, Gordon Parks, I'm a super fan of. I met him once. And then, yeah. Malik Sidibe I've met, but yeah.
What is your biggest weakness?
What is it? I think
Can be nothing, maybe.
No. No, I have like a level of urgency, so I can have impatience.
And what would be the objects you would never want to lose, if there was one?
I mean, I think object-wise, honestly, it's more of people.
Good.
Yeah. Objects, I mean, it's objects.
What would you like to be reincarnated as?
A bird.
Yeah.
And the last one, in reference to Marcel Proust, what's the taste of your childhood?
The taste of my childhood.
Yeah.
mean, my most like ancient memory, because coffee is it's a big thing in Ethiopia. It's the birthplace. But the smell of coffee, and my grandmother used to give me like a lot of milk with a drop of coffee. So for me, coffee is something that has a deep emotional connection.
Thank you very much, Aida Muluneh.
Thank you so much.
you.
Is that it? So are they asking questions? Or?
Yeah, let's do it. 5 minutes?
Yeah.
We still have a few minutes. If some of you would like to ask questions, there's a mic somewhere.
Yeah, talking about your process for create an image, I had the impression, listening to you, that more than create or build an image, you're searching an image or you're searching a feeling. And I have the impression that, you search a feeling when you are creating or making an image more than a photo. And what's the component of spontaneous, sorry, what my English is.
Your English is perfect, I can understand.
Or maybe your dreams, there's a component of unconscious part in that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I wish I would write my dreams down, but my dreams are a bunch of things, so I never thought about translating my dreams into art, but I realize my dreams are too crazy, so it's not possible. No, the thing that I discovered is that the conscious effort is making the work for me. But actually the subconscious part of me I'm only aware of it from people looking at the work. So the viewer is the one that gives me the subconscious part of what I am thinking. And I've always found this very fascinating. And to me, the best audience is not the art critics, sorry. It's not, it's not or the collectors. It's like when children come to my exhibition, that's what I find like just very interesting and quite amazing, because they give me such a pure view. And that's when I realized, okay, because creativity, and I've said this, creativity is like a spiritual manifestation, Creativity is not something that you can mathematically calculate and say, I'm going to be creative. It doesn't work like that, So you have to open yourself up in order to receive whatever inspiration is going to come your way. So sometimes it's just, like the way the wind blows, and something will come into my mind, or I see like something crossing my path, and then I have to write that down, and I have to sketch it. And that's why I was saying earlier, creativity it's something that you have to be open to receive it, and then you're translating it within your own self in order to bring it back out. And one thing that Haile Gerima used to tell us, when I was in film school is, he used to say that, true creativity is vomiting everything inside of you out. You know what I'm saying? And that's where we go back to being authentic. And that's why I think the viewer, regardless of where the viewer is from, if we've done our work, I believe that, art should not be viewed just because you are an elite or you're educated or, whatever that we create. Everyone should be able to find themselves in it somehow. And that's when you find, okay, you've done the work, or you've done your job as it relates as to being an artist.
Thank you. I just want to thank you because I found that an invitation to make a dialogue and not just a monologue in your work. Thank you.
No, it's not. I don't, and I've said this before. I don't offer answers. I'm asking the questions, and hearing what people, because different people react to each work in a very different way, and that has a lot to do with that person's own history as well, of what they gravitate towards. And sort of it becomes like this exchange between the viewer and myself, and to see how people interpret the work. But this took like many years to arrive to a visual language that I was comfortable in. And that's why I always emphasize about this whole vulnerability and authenticity, If you're not able to present that, it's like the audience will sniff it out, when you're pretending to, I don't know, it just, even subconsciously, something impacts them, or what they read into it, or what they don't find value in.
So you said you don't have answers, but you only have questions. So my question to you is, what question would you have for the audience tonight?
Was this informative?
Sorry?
Was this informative?
Yes, it is.
No, I can talk for like a long time, but the challenge is I have so many stories, so I can't go through everything. So if you really know my history, you'll understand sort of what I've gone through to arrive to this point. But more, I think, important is it's also this whole thing for like the new generation. I mean, you and I have been around for a while in this field, so. But for the new generation, it's like I don't think the new generation is getting enough input from those of us that are actually on the ground doing the work and showing a different view of how to live this artistic life, because the institutions are only preparing only for one segment of it. So these kind of conversations is important. I wish it was, if we had it at the school, it would also be super interesting as well.
What are your plans? Do you have any ideas of new collection, new themes, new medium, maybe? I don't know. Some music?
Yeah. No, I wish. If I could sing, I would be a singer.
Or new fairs, or I don't know. I can sing for you.
So now with the new body of work, I'm going back into the physical, into the analog. So I've been working with silkscreen printing, hand painting, and that form of transmitting images. And it's a very solitude experience. I don't know if we can go towards the end, if they can find it. But the new body of work that I have made, if you guys want to look it up, it's called The Bloom I Borrow. Keep going. It's the ones that are in the lawn. So within that work, it's basically, I wanted to go back into my darkroom experience, because I really started in the darkroom. And so painting by hand, doing all these sort of, because silk screening also, there's a mathematics, okay, here we go. So for example, this body of work, for example, the tulips are silk screen printed, this is printed regular, and then the yellow is hand painted. So to make this work, it actually slows me down, because I realize existing in the digital, it's just not the same. You can go to the next. So again, for example, this is silk screen, and then hand painted in the green, and then the photo printing is just the mask and the stairs. So I want to go back into the physical, into the hand form. So I realized when I started doing these paintings that there's, I went from like a crew of a team to produce the work to this very solitude experience of just me alone painting these things. And earlier, she was asking what music I listened to. I realized when I'm doing this work, I can only have like a movie in the background. Like I don't want any music attached to it. And my favorite film, I've seen it 10,000 times while I was making this, was The Godfather. Don't ask me why, but I know everything. But anyway, so after this, then it's just to go back into my cinema, go back to my film. I want to conclude my artistic journey in cinema. So this is my goal starting this year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.